Good afternoon and welcome to UK Column Live at our new start time of 1 o'clock, and all our programmes in the week will start at 1, including Thursday's 2-hour show. So welcome back to the studio in 2013. I'm your host today, Brian Gerrish, and with me in the studio, Mike Robinson.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Little bit cold and chilly outside, but here we are back online from studios in Plymouth, England. So thank you very much if you've tuned in to join us. And we're going to get straight back into having a look at the news and what's been happening in Britain and overseas. And we'll be trying hard to get across what's really happening instead of the propaganda that's being pushed out by mainstream press, TV and radio. Just a little announcement before we get into the main items of the news, and that is that UK column correspondent Patrick Henningsen is currently overseas. He's in Lebanon at the moment, and over the next few days we expect to be taking some reports from him, commenting on what is really happening on the ground in the Middle East. So that should prove to be a very informative and exciting system of live reports for the UK column. We've also, later in the afternoon, unfortunately we can't do it on camera, but we've got the retired soldier John Coles is coming in to see us today, and we're going to be learning more about this unbelievable case where this poor gentleman is prevented from seeing his wife, who is in a care home. That was something we broadcast before Christmas, and I have to say we had an absolutely incredible response. So hopefully we're going to have a good meeting with John. We're going to learn more about that case, and we will be bringing you more details in due course. So really moving on to the news, we should start with an important subject, of course, after all of the Christmas festivities, which is booze. And you've got a very interesting little article here from America, I think.
Well, this is in the Mail. This is from a couple of days ago. But 5 inmates are suing the biggest beer and wine producers for $1 billion. This is prison inmates. And this is because they believe that, or they're claiming that alcohol made them break the law. I suppose the devil made them do it. But they're suing Miller, Pepsi, and Gallo, and amongst others, for $1 billion. They feel that alcohol needs to be labelled as being addictive and likely to cause you to behave in ways that otherwise you wouldn't.
Yep.
That seems to be, well, to be serious for a second, we are going to be covering this in more detail with Martin Edwards, who has been writing for the UK column for a long time. This is part of an agenda, and although we, are kind of making fun of this a little bit, it is part of an agenda. The most high-profile example of it is smoking, obviously, but it applies to food. It applies to alcohol. Now they're pushing an agenda with regard to labelling alcohol, and it's to do with United Nations policy. It's to do with control of people's lives. It's to do with areas around what's known as the precautionary principle, and we're going to be talking about that with Martin in a few days' time.
Yeah, well, the minimum we can say is, once again, this is taking us to the point where we, ordinary people, are not allowed to make common sense decisions about our lives. We need other people to do that for us.
Yes. And
I think this is part of the propaganda being put together here. So where does that take us? We can't have a news programme, of course, without mentioning our leader, David Cameron. And my goodness, he's appearing in the mainstream press a lot at the moment.
Well, today he is releasing the new reform agenda. He's releasing a sort of trumpet call, really, for how well the coalition has done in the first half of its term, because of course we've got fixed term parliaments unconstitutionally at the moment. So this is a midterm review he's releasing today, and he's talking about the agenda for the second half of the term. And I just wanted to highlight a few issues that have been raised. That was the Financial Times, but the first point is a new single state pension will be introduced in the next Parliament that will simplify, they say, the current system. We'll talk about that in a second. Then they're talking about a cap at last on the amount of money that the elderly will have to pay for their care. Then we've got various other things like tax breaks for childcare, but of course in the meantime they're totally dismantling the care system.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about this in more detail in a moment, but I just wanted to begin with this one because apparently the big society is dead, Sarah says, the charities chief. So apparently there was a letter sent to the Prime Minister by a group of charities basically complaining that local authorities can no longer afford to fund them. And it really highlights, I think, what the charity sector has become under Cameron's leadership. Well, it began with Blair, but particularly in the last few years, where so many charities have been set up by government to implement government policy and funded by government. So they're not raising money from the public, they're raising money directly from Parliament.
Yeah,
they're not charities at all, really, are they?
Well, of course, my favourite common purpose is a fantastic example of this, that we've got an organisation which says it is a charity, but when you actually look at the funding streams, the overwhelming funding stream is public money. I believe these charities were set up for a specific purpose, which was order to drive a political agenda. Now they've done their job, of course the government is sacrificing them, so we're starting to see them squeal. But it's still worth following these charities through, because there's a number of them which are still incredibly active in political networks.
So you think the charities' work is generally done?
Well, I think to a large extent, because the third sector was clearly set up with Blair and Brown. It's been carried through, but we're now starting to see things slide over into the corporate international company control more than we are the charity sector. So we'll see.
Yes. So these charities are squealing because of the squeeze on funds and the economic squeeze. But let's just look at some of the other things that the midterm review was talking about. So first of all, we've got this article from the Mail. Workers face waiting until the 70s for a state pension. Now, I'm glad the Mail has again finally caught up with the UK column, because we've been talking about this for quite a long time, possibly even years. That the state pension pot was raided during the Blair-Brown years to the tune of about £2.5 trillion. That money is pension fund is unfunded, and there was no question that the retirement age was going to have to rise in order to cope with this. But it's okay, because women will benefit from the most radical pension reforms for a century. It's not clear how. But they will benefit, because it is brilliant for women, according to the Mail.
Well, it'll help them pay their increased premiums for insurance, for car insurance.
Well,
it'll possibly just balance out, I should think.
Right. But the sting in the tail, as the Mail says here, is that the state pension age, already set to rise to 67 for both men and women, will increase further in years ahead. And I stick by what I've said before. And anybody of my age and younger, say mid-40s and younger, be very unlikely they'll be able to retire at all. Yeah,
the aim is that people work until they drop. So, and this is not, of course, a Tory policy. This is a cross-party political agenda. They're all involved in it.
So another thing in the midterm review was that private companies would be permitted to take over the building of new roads and probably the maintenance of roads, and undoubtedly that will be the Rothschilds. In the meantime, we've got a washout winter, leaving a £1 billion repair bill for Britain's crumbling roads. How's that going to be financed? It's going to be financed by selling off the road system. They've permitted this infrastructure to collapse to the state that it's in. In the meantime, they've been spending, we all know anybody that drives up and down the M5 or the M6 and many of other Britain's motorways knows that they've been spending billions and billions of pounds putting in fibre optic cabling and all kinds of stuff. So they've been investing heavily in the infrastructure in order to start charging us. I believe that's what they've been investing in. In the meantime, they've allowed the surface of the road to collapse to the point where it's damaging cars. And of course, the government doesn't have the money for it. They're going to have to sell them off.
There'll now be the outcry which says that we need to deal with the road problem, and along comes, I think it's Mr. Rothschild who's already made a provisional offer, hasn't he, to run some of the roads?
That's exactly right. So, of course, something that we highlighted in the newspaper, I think about 2 years ago, was the fact that none of the money collected by DVLA actually goes into maintenance of the roads. DVLA just seems to be a self-financing organisation. It doesn't seem to actually do anything other than finance itself with our money.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in the meantime, there's still a faction fight going on within the City of London, and another Conservative peer this time, this is from the Conservative Home website, has come out calling for full separation of the banks. Glad to see this happening, but it's there is a faction fight going on within the City of London between those who want to see the banks separated because it's the only sane policy to base banking reform on, and those who don't, like George Osborne, because he's not sane. Yeah. Wanted to highlight this. This is Lord Flight. He was Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury from 2001 to 2004, and he's now Chairman of Flight and Partners Recovery Fund. He's saying it's necessary to restore a culture of integrity to the banking sector to achieve more manageable banking units and much more competitive banking industry. That's all true, but basically the banks as they stand are bankrupt, and that's the key problem that needs to be resolved.
Yeah, to which we say keep having a read of the UK column site and hopefully recommending that to other people, and look at the Bradbury pound and the fact that we could solve all of this financial madness by the nation issuing its own currency as credit as opposed to debt. This is the key problem. So George Osborne is going to spend another year telling us a pack of lies when we could solve this financial crisis overnight.
Well, we could.
What have you got?
Well, interest rates will remain rock bottom for 4 more years as the economy struggles to recover, and again, we come into 2013, the same old rhetoric. They're doing nothing to actually fix the economy, so of course the economy is going to struggle to recover. The language is interesting because the Mail's saying this comes as the economy lurches towards an unprecedented triple dip recession. And of course, as we've been saying for a long time now, this economic problem is unprecedented. It's something that hasn't been seen for nearly 100 years. And in fact, it's much worse than what happened in the 1930s.
Yeah, well, I can say I live in a reasonably small village, and the Village magazine arrived the other day, and I was fascinated to read in it that somebody, I believe a person with a kind heart, I don't doubt that, but they're suggesting that the village should set up its own food bank system because of the number of people who are having trouble feeding themselves. And the article also suggested that our village food bank should actually network in with food banks now being set up on a bigger scale in bigger towns. So here we are in 2013, after years of excellent governance by Tony Blair and Gordon Brown and David Cameron, of course, and we're now being reduced to food banks. So as you say, Mike, we're now being taken into a financial and economic scene that we haven't seen for 100 years or so.
Yeah.
Is it preventable? Absolutely. Could we solve it tomorrow? Absolutely. Take the power away from the international banks who are simply creating the debt burden. It is that simple.
Well, they're imposing it on us.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Through their politician puppets, but we'll come on to that. But just 2 quick slides here. A quarter of mothers forced to turn their... I'm sorry all these are coming from the Daily Mail, by the way, but
well, I was just going to say we're starting 2013 by hitting people very hard, but this is the reality of what's actually being foisted on us.
Right, so we've got 56% of families turn heating off when the children leave the house, according to the Daily Mail. And experts say the number of households suffering fuel poverty will double by 2016. Now we've got the situation where where our utilities companies were sold off. They're making huge profits. They are also permitting our infrastructure to collapse because they're not investing any of those profits back into the future generating capacity of the country, and they're going to come cap in hand in the future for money from taxpayers in order to regenerate the infrastructure.
Well, I'd add on that one that a few days ago I was called by a representative of Scottish Power who was very keen for me to change my existing energy supplier, and we had a little debate over the telephone about the profits that the private energy companies are making, but the gentleman couldn't get past the fact that we have to pay for our energy, and therefore if it costs more, it costs more. He could save me a few pence in the pound, he said, for an unknown period of time. But of course, the moment we talk about the taxpayer having paid for the investment into the energy industry, the building of the power supply, power stations, and now what we've got, of course, is the benefit of that being creamed off by these private companies.
They're not only just creaming off the benefit, they're actually looting the future generating capacity of the country. So they're stealing from future generations.
I did cover some of that in the telephone conversation, and of course that call was recorded, so I hope they do use it for training and
quality purposes.
Oh, quality purposes,
yeah. And related to that then, we've got the head of Waitrose coming out and warning about the price of food. Now we've been also warning about this for quite some time, basically warning that because of the inclement weather last year, that he sees that food prices will continue to rise, and he's talking about right across the board, everything will be hit. It looks set to last for the foreseeable future. Now we've been...
Is it my imagination, Mike, or is this man smiling in the picture as he announces the huge rises?
He looks like he's smiling, yes. Yeah, well, it's gonna do no harm for his profits,
absolutely.
I'm quite sure.
Well, that was my point, really.
Yes. So he's saying input food inflation of around 3 to 3.5%, but they expect input prices, they expect them to go up as much as 5%. So whenever that hits the shelves, you know, Waitrose, Tesco's, these people are not going to absorb these costs. It is going to have a massive impact on the bottom line of everybody's income. So, you know, we've been talking about perhaps being pragmatic and sensible about having some kind of food storage.
Yeah.
And I think to protect yourself from this inflation, it would be wise to do so.
Yeah. The other thing is that UK Column Live is going to continue to work and investigate the subject of Britain's farming industry. And I have to say that we had a very, very good response to the interview that we did with Welsh farmer Watkin Richards just for Christmas. And we've got a lot of information coming in now about what farmers clearly regard as a massive destruction of Britain's farming industry via foot and mouth. And we've also now got people talking to us about the adverse impact of animal vaccines. Taken together, we're seeing that basically the will is that Britain does not operate an efficient and an effective agricultural industry.
Well, because the policy is for interdependence.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to be an independent nation state, self-sufficient, feeding yourself. You've got to be interdependent, and that's part of the political agenda at present.
Yeah.
Right. Also in the news, the child benefits changes which go live today, and this article in the Telegraph is publishing letters from people basically complaining that the new system is unfair because, you know, a family with two wage earners that are earning less than £50,000 each, but still bringing in a family income of up to £100,000 a year will not be affected by this, whereas if there's only one breadwinner in the household whose salary is over £50,000, then they get cuts. So the system is unfair, but the key point about this is another example of the systematic dismantling of our social security infrastructure.
Yeah.
And, you know, who's doing it? Well, the two laughing buffoons. And these two buffoons have come out and said that that they have already opted out of claiming child benefit, and that's all very well for them on their multi-million-pound incomes from various other things, aside from being either prime ministers or cabinet ministers. But also linked to this is the tax nightmare for parents over these child benefit reforms, because what actually happened was that the HMRC didn't bother to tell most of the people that are affected by this that there was a deadline, and that they had a deadline to be set that they had to opt out by a certain date, and if they don't opt out by a certain date, then they've got to start filling in tax returns. So Osborne has been accused, according to the Telegraph, of family bashing, and the point that they're making here is that most people that are stuck having to do tax returns need the help of an accountant to do so. So this isn't just the removal of a benefit from people, but there's actually a cost burden involved. And the other really pretty incredible thing about this is that overall, when you take everything into account, this benefits change is going to cost HMRC an extra £50 million.
Yeah.
Isn't that clever?
Well, of course, if it fits the pattern of making life more difficult for people and causing them problems and costing the country money, which is what we believe the agenda is, it absolutely makes sense.
Right.
It's putting pressure on people, isn't it, at the end of the day?
So this is a tax nightmare for people. People are going to have to start filling in tax returns. But then in the Mirror a couple of days ago, we had more evidence that, in fact, what's going on, the opposition in Syria, is more or less Al-Qaeda. Yeah,
well, I think we just to show that we have got some balance over the papers. Here we are with the Mirror. This is from Saturday, January the 5th. We'll just comment on the front page, but we've got a huge advert for slimming, Slim for Life, and then Naomi Campbell was mugged. Of course, this is front page news in the UK. But if we delve into the paper, I just mentioned this very briefly, of course. The Mirror is boasting that John Prescott is now going to become a major columnist. So there's a man who completely rubbished the reputation of himself and MPs by romping with his mistress in Parliament, and now he's a man who's going to be writing and advising us. But that gets
But he is an expert on press standards, after all.
Yes, an absolute expert.
Very big expert.
Very big.
Yeah.
But that's a double-page spread. But it was on page 15 that this very interesting article appeared, and we'll give you some idea of the balance, because here we are talking about Seb Coe, and he's getting upset because Olympic athletes were twittering and tweeting too much. We've got the diver Tom Daley. So here's most of the attention for the public. And then here was a tiny column which we didn't actually see in another newspaper. And this was commenting on this Al-Qaeda gentleman, Mohammed Zawahiri, who was seized by government Syrian troops as he prepared to meet up with rebels just outside Damascus. Now, what's interesting is the article says that Western intelligence fears the arrest could lead to more bloodshed. So we have a supposedly Al-Qaeda terrorist who is arrested by Assad's forces, but Western intelligence says this is going to lead to more bloodshed. And they say this could well enhance the Al-Qaeda leader's interest in promoting violence across Syria, as Zawahiri Jr. is well respected by the network. So the inference is that because this man was arrested by Assad's forces, it's actually going to increase violence. On the other hand, we've got Al-Qaeda. We're told, of course, that Al-Qaeda brought down Twin Towers. They're responsible for every terrorist act in the world. They do all of this from caves. They're quite remarkable people. But we've now got Al-Qaeda being identified as operating with the Syrian rebels, and of course the rebels are being supported by David Cameron and
William Hague.
So it's getting a bit confusing, because it would appear that we've now got the government supporting terrorists.
Well, we have,
which leads us on to your...
So you may wonder what tax and Al-Qaeda have to do with each other? And the answer is this, the Terrorism Act 2000. And the Terrorism Act 2000 says in section,
should come up, there we go.
There we go. It says in section 15, a person commits an offence if he A, invites another to provide money or other property, and B, intends that it should be used or has reasonable cause to suspect that it may be used for the purposes of terrorism. Number 2, a person commits an offence if he A, receives money or other property, and B, intends that it should be used or has reasonable cause to suspect that it may be used for the purposes of terrorism. And 3, a person commits an offence if he A, provides money or other property, and B, knows or has reasonable cause to suspect that it will be used for the purposes of terrorism. And I mean, the man we've got to thank for pointing this out is Tony Farrell. But the key point here is that Cameron, Clegg, their government, HMRC are committing unlawful acts in the sense that they're in breach of the Terrorism Act in 15(1) and 15(2), thereby encouraging us to pay our taxes and then using that money to fund terrorism.
And we've now got published proof that they are funding terrorists, because we've got Al-Qaeda connection with the rebels in Syria.
Right.
So this is not conspiracy theory. This is evidence.
Indeed. And section 3, a person commits an offence if he provides money. So if we pay tax to this government, which is funding terrorism, we are committing an offence under the Terrorism Act. So I just wanted to put that up in black and white. All those people that are affected by this this benefits change, which means that they are required, according to this government, to fill in tax returns and put in tax returns, I strongly suggest that they don't, because they would be breaking they would be committing an offence to do so if they follow that up with any kind of money.
But for those people who watch with great sadness and angst about what is happening to this country, it's in-your-face evidence like this that, of course, we can challenge these people. So we now know that David Cameron and William Hague and the rest of the coalition government are supporting international terrorists in Libya. And that is an offence against
Syria.
I beg your pardon, in Syria. There are so many countries where we are now involved. But essentially they are supporting and funding terrorists, which is a breach of the Act. We should be challenging these people. Is your local Conservative or Lib Dem MP aware that he's now involved in a terrorist conspiracy?
It is interesting that they create these laws. They've created so many laws in the last 20 years that they're not even capable of staying within them themselves.
Well, I don't think they even think on those terms, Mike. They actually think they're above the law. But of course, it is an interesting thought that they can create laws by which they can be ensnared themselves. And I think that would be wonderful to see David Cameron in court alongside preferably Tony Blair on charges of genocide. We'll look forward to that later in the year, hopefully.
Well, I think just to end this section, I mean, the key point that I've been trying to make in that section of slides is that this is a systematic dismantling of the infrastructure of the country. And you know, it is key that we get rid of this government and replace it with people that are willing to act in the interests of the people of this country.
In a moral, common sense way.
Ordinary
people is really, that's what's required.
Absolutely.
Ordinary people.
But unfortunately, if Cameron has his way, that ain't going to be what happens. Because he wants to stick around till 2020.
I think this is what's been fascinating for me anyway, reading papers and having a look at the media over the Christmas period, was that you can see what the agenda being pushed through. So if we look at the country, what's happened to it over the last 10 years, surely the answer is there. We can only talk about decline, destabilisation, impending chaos and decline. And here is Cameron in this article actually saying he wants to be until 2020 in order to keep this agenda going through. If you analyse it in the way that these people are deliberately breaking the country apart, then of course statements like this make total sense.
So he's talking about an enormous reform agenda. It's incredible. He's telling us exactly what he's doing. And of course, I come back to what I've said before. This is, they are challenging us to challenge them.
Yeah,
because our silence is taken as consent.
Absolutely. Well, I apologise for the next slide here, but we're talking about the quality of people. It's a pretty unpleasant photograph from the Telegraph of Mandelson. I'll leave the Lord bit aside, and Blair. But what the article is pointing out is that both these men are now rapidly becoming multi-millionaires on the basis of their contacts and knowledge gained whilst in Parliament and as elected members. So profits growing in Tony Blair's company, and the article is sort of suggesting that Blair is giving a little bit of help and advice to Mandelson. And of course Mandelson as a socialist, a true socialist, is on record of saying that he had no objection to people getting filthy rich. So on one hand we've got total hypocrisy, but it's more serious than this, because this man is totally in bed with the international banking fraternity, and of course the objective is for a dictatorship where people, wonderful people like these two men, think they will be part of the elite to help govern the world. Who's going to stop it? We are. You are, but you have to get off your bottoms and actually do something. And that was part of the motto of 2013. This year is the year for people to not sit and observe, but it's the year to stand up and be counted. Otherwise, these sorts of guys are going to rule the roost. Esther Rantzen has suddenly reared her head after an amazing period of silence following the Jimmy Savile scandal, and you picked this one up, Mike, which is quite extraordinary, isn't it? She's saying,
I think it is an extraordinary thing for her to come out and say she is saying that that the focus on the famous could jeopardise young victims seeking justice. Now, while I absolutely agree with her that the focus on the celebrities is absolutely wrong, because the focus should be on the politicians, or it should be on everybody that's involved, but there should be a hell of a lot more focus on Parliament, in my opinion. Really, it's hard to know whether Ms. Rantzen is scared of something rather than you know, trying to suggest that, because she's not talking about politicians at all. She's not saying that the focus is in the wrong direction. She's saying that really Scotland Yard's high-profile U-Tree, that the focus on the famous could jeopardise the chances of young abuse victims seeing justice. She's saying that it's in danger of trivialising and sensationalising child abuse. She's basically calling the Metropolitan Police incompetent, and it's hard to know exactly why she's so concerned. Well,
my particular view on this is that, of course, if you talk to people who are victims, who are knowledgeable on paedophile rings, what they say is that it's a club, and when you're in the club, it doesn't matter what your social status is. If you are abusing children, the man or woman next to you doing that is your friend. And I think what's going on here is, of course, as the police investigation does begin to fan out through the media and the famous people, we're actually now starting for the first time to butt up against politicians and senior members of the establishment. And of course, this is where they're also jittery. So I think Esther's got cold feet. There are many mothers out there who say that when they went to Esther Rantzen for help, they were offered help, but in their cases where children had been taken by the state, Esther then backed off. And certainly there's one case in particular where it's quite remarkable how quickly this lady pulled away. There's been great criticism of her in the mainstream press that she didn't appear to take the necessary actions when she had the opportunity to bring Savile to book, or to at least point out the culture in the BBC. And now you could almost say, what is she trying to do here? Is she trying to say that if you're a famous person who's involved in paedophilia, then the police shouldn't go near you? It's quite extraordinary, and I find it quite dangerous, really, that of course this woman is known as one of the Childline founders. there's something inherently mucky about this whole business, and I find it surprising that she's suddenly come out of the woodwork.
And my concern is that they're going to try and collapse it like they did with Operation Ore in a haze of incompetence.
Well, we'll just follow on from that. This is a little article from the Chester Chronicle from the 3rd of January, in which basically it was being reported that a petition had been set up for action to be taken against Sir Peter Morrison, who's one of the Tories whose name came up fairly recently with allegations of child abuse. Very, very interesting article here. It was somebody involved with 38 Degrees, which is one of the campaigning organisations, but they've started a petition. Of course, this gentleman is dead, so it's another one of it's all historical. So we're getting a focus on a politician, but this one's dead. Whereas what we don't see is any real focus at the moment on people who are involved in the paedophile rings who are actually alive and in positions of high power. But nevertheless, I think it's a gentleman in this case. He is actually pushing for action on this particular politician. And what I would say is, of course, if the police do their job, and we know there are many police officers at the moment who certainly do want to do their job in order to break up the high-level paedophile rings, they're going to have to start looking at politicians.
Yeah.
Where's it all come from, of course? Well, a bit of a hint through this gentleman who's been talking about the sexual revolution.
So, the damage it's done appalls me, says A.N. Wilson in the Mail again. Again, sorry about that. But he goes on and in this article he gives a history of the so-called sexual revolution from Lady Chatterley's lover through the Beatles and so on, and you know, he's talking about the really appalling effects that the sexual revolution has had on society as a whole, the number of abortions, the number of breakups in the family, the rise in sexually transmitted disease, not only AIDS but many others. And he's just looking at society and saying, really, this is horrendous what has happened as a result of the last 40 years of liberalisation in this area. But at the end, in what's otherwise, I thought was quite a reasonable article, at the end he basically writes it off as being something which has happened, you know, through a natural process that's happened because his generation made a mistake, and I absolutely, this is where I disagree with his piece completely, because of course I don't believe for 1 second that there was a mistake in this at all. It was an active campaign. Many organisations got involved. The one that I like to mention is the Congress for Cultural Freedom, which was notionally an anti-communist advocacy group, apologies. It was set up in 1950. Its chairman was Bertrand Russell, and if anybody doesn't know who Bertrand Russell was, we wrote an article in 2010 called Bertrand Russell, The Impact of Science in Society. It's on the UK Column website. Yeah. Go and have a look at it. If you just use the search box at the top of the UK Column website and search for Bertrand Russell, it's the first article that appears. But you know, the Congress for Cultural Freedom was an organisation set up by the Ford Foundation. It was financed by the CIA. It was promoting this cultural liberalisation, which has led to where we are today. So while I think that this article in the Mail that we've been talking about is very, very good, I think the conclusions that he draws, that it was just a natural progression, are completely wrong. Is
this article designed to take people's eye off the fact that we are actually being attacked? This is a common theme for UK Column Live. What do we believe? We believe that our own government is attacking us, is attacking the British people at the moment. And of course the dilution of moral values is a key part of this. So has this article been written in order to warn us about what's happening, or is it to take our eye off the ball? We've all become a little bit lackadaisical. It's all our fault. It's not actually the people who are starting, for example, to ram this stuff through the schools in the over-sexualisation of young children?
Well, I think it reflects something that most people, the majority of people, just can't get their head around the idea, because they wouldn't do that to us, would they, as they say, right? They can't get their heads around the idea that they would do that to us, and so this is, I think this is the biggest challenge for 2013 for the majority of people. We've got to get them understanding that this is an agenda which has been running for many years,
and through many different vehicles, many of them charities, of course, if we do the analysis.
Yes.
Well, we've got a couple more items here. The following one, very sad. This is a young girl up in Kendal in Cumbria, Helena Farrell, who has committed suicide in the last few days. So our condolences to her family. The reason that we wanted to report this very sad event is because, of course, in many places across the country, of which one of the worst has been Bridgend in South Wales, there has been an unprecedented increase in the suicide of young people, and a very common theme is that the method of suicide is hanging. And I would just like to say that the subject of the suicides in South Wales has absolutely not gone away. Numbers have increased to above 70, but over the last few weeks, due to some excellent work that's been carried out by groups in South Wales, helped by others in Cornwall, we've now for the first time started to see local councillors actually paying attention to some of the bodies who claim that they are helping prevent suicides, but in fact seem to be very closely connected to a number of activities which are known to give rise to suicides. And the key areas that are being investigated are creative dance and drama. In particular, we're seeing very, very dark, disturbing plays being given to children and younger people. We are seeing young children being encouraged to take part in making very deep and disturbing, dark and disturbing films on such subject of suicides. And we're also seeing children being placed at risk by the fact that they are being subjected to applied behavioural psychology without any thought as to what impact that might have on their personalities. So for the first time, a very serious and heavy subject, but we are starting to see local councillors across South Wales now starting to at least ask the right questions. What is causing these suicides? Why is there a common theme of hanging? And what are these organisations? And again, many of these organisations claim to be charities, but what are they actually doing in presenting this very dark, disturbing material to school children? Some of the blogs and Twitter posts that the South Wales group have been monitoring, we also have the extraordinary event of people reporting and saying that they're almost predicting an increase in suicide. So what do these people know, and why is it that the key bodies who claim to be there to help prevent suicide do not want to look at any of the evidence being put in front of them? So a tragedy in Cumbria. Our best wishes go out to the family in very difficult times, but there is something at work in Britain at the moment which is affecting our young people, and we need to look into it. We're going to end on the subject of Trident. UK Column has been reporting for several years that Britain's independent nuclear deterrent would be taken away. It would be done by amalgamation with the French, and the aim would be to take away Britain's independent nuclear deterrent and therefore lock us even further into the European military machine.
More interdependence.
More interdependence. This was an article from The Guardian where it was pointing out that basically Trident couldn't be moved from Scotland to Plymouth. The excuse given is because the additional risk of not only the Trident nuclear submarines but also their warheads in a populated area. And I'll just follow it on with this website, Liberal Conspiracy, which is also talking about the same subject. In fact, this is an anti-nuclear website, which is saying we should simply get rid of the weapons altogether. But they are picking up in this article that there is now a movement to amalgamate British and in particular French armed forces. And so these two articles are highlighting the fact that there is now a movement towards getting rid of Britain's nuclear deterrent. And of course this is not being done via an open debate through Parliament. It's actually being done through clearly behind the scenes manoeuvring on the basis of Scotland's independence. So have a look at those articles. We are reporting this on the basis that once again the government in Westminster is lying to the electorate about what they're doing, and the fact that independence for Scotland is nothing about helping the Scottish people, it's about furthering the movement into the European superstate. Okay, we'll end on that. A pretty heavy start to 2013 by UK Column Live. We make no apologies. We are being attacked by the British government, and if Britain is to get itself out of this mess, it requires all of us and all of you to start fighting in a lawful way. If you'd like to help what we're doing, please subscribe. We are using money obviously to produce the papers. We're paying petrol, telephone costs, postage, and now we're able to get camera crews out investigating and reporting across the country, notwithstanding special correspondents in the
Middle East.
Lebanon.
Yeah.
Got it right that time. And finally, a big thank you for our viewers and listeners who were kind enough to send in clothes parcels. Obviously you thought UK Column Live team were in need of some help and support. So a big thank you, particularly for the ties and the sweaters, which we'll make good use of over the coming weeks. So thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you same time tomorrow. Thank you.